Hey there everyone, Pal here, and welcome back. Today we're doing a Hey What's That Stellaris. So Stellaris is a 4X grand strategy game from Paradox Interactive. For some of you that tells you, everything you need to know. For those that don't understand what I just said, so 4X grand strategy games are similar to your Civilizations type games plus a few others. So they tend to be large strategy games with an element based on, or a focus based on, managing and controlling an empire, kingdom, something. So the 4X's are explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Yes, I realize those are EX, not X. I didn't create the nickname for them. But essentially what they come down to is you start off on a map where you don't really know where things are. You explore, you find resources. When you find these resources, you expand your boundaries to include those resources that you can then exploit those resources in order to normally make an army or something in order to conquer your enemies. That's the 4X grand strategy games. Civilization is a 4X game. It tends to be considered towards the low end in terms of complexity. It's one of the easier 4X games. You have games like Sins of the Solar Empire, which are kind of your medium complexity 4X game. And then you have the high-end 4X games. And there are some that actually go beyond this, but Paradox tends to be towards that upper echelon, not in terms of quality of product, but in terms of complex products. The Crusader Kings 2 game, Crusader Kings 2, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, March of the Eagles, all tend to be rather complex, deep games. They have a lot of nuanced systems that have a real learning curve to get to them. So within the 4X grand strategy genre, there's a lot of fans for Paradox Interactive. And when they came along and said that, they were going to do a space game, a Masters of Orion type game, but Paradox, that sounded really, really good to a lot of us. The idea of a Crusader Kings type game in space, yes, please sign me up, take my money. When do I get it? And, well, we got it last week, or 2 weeks ago at some point. We got it sometime just recently. And it's pretty good. That's about the best thing I can say about it. It's pretty good. I gotta be honest, I'm a little disappointed in this game. I don't want to make it sound like this game is bad, because it's not. It's just a little light on what I would call key features, or at least key features that would flesh out the later game. It's light on. What we have is the base product of what is probably going to be an extremely good 4X strategy game in a year or so after it's had a lot of DLC. But as it stands right now, it's just slightly better than average as 4X strategy, space strategy games go. I would put it right there with Galactic Civilizations 3. They're about the same for me. But let's go into a little more detail, talk about the goods, talk about the bads. All right, the goods. The goods are, the goods are tied to what I was just saying, actually. The first one. Paradox games are complex by nature. They are intensive when it comes to learning. I can spend 12 hours playing Crusader Kings 2 and still not fully know how to do everything I might want to do or how all the systems work. Europa Universalis 4 takes another 10 hours to get into. They are very complex games with a steep learning curve. Stellaris is probably the easiest 4X game to learn from Paradox ever. A new player that has just a basic understanding, someone that's played Civilization, say, has a basic understanding of 4X games and how they function, can pick up Stellaris and within 3 to 5 hours be doing very well with this game. It's still got a learning curve, obviously. Like I said, 3 to 5 hours, that's not instantaneous. But compared to many of the other products from Paradox Interactive, this one is the most easily accessible for new players. If you're someone that sees people talking about some of the crazy stories that happen in Crusader Kings and stuff, but could never get their head around learning them, this is a good place to begin to learn the Paradox games. Because it's missing many of the systems we will talk about here later on, it's easy and fairly approachable as things go. And on one hand, that's a negative. On the other hand, we gotta admit that is a positive. The game also has probably the best race creation character creation tools for a 4X game I've seen. I'm sure someone can point me to one that's better off, but you can create some very interesting races within this game. So you have like 4 or 5 different species archetypes that you can choose from. You have like humanoids or your ape type people. You have avians, you have fungoids, you have reptilians, and I want to say there's one more I can't think of. And you can choose from quite a few numbers within these. There's 15 or 20 within each subheading. And that's just your basic look for your character. You then can go through and you can create these very complex races with different traits, different political alignings, religious alignings throughout. And every option has its pros and cons. So you can create a race that is very xenophobic, and that means you're going to have a tough time making friends with anyone. You're probably going to be fighting on your own a lot of the times, which is a clear negative, but at the same time, it means that your race won't hesitate to enslave alien races. So while you might be fighting on your own, you can also field a slave army or a slave workforce in order to power your empire. There's very religious races that are going to seek peace and everything. And while they might not have a very strong army because of this, they tend to be very happy people. They tend to prosper a lot, so they tend to grow population-wise very quickly. And everyone has a pro and a con. And you can just go through and there's like a point system that you can use. And say you want several very interesting pros. Well, you could take a few con levels. Like you can take a con that reduces how quickly your race breeds, which will reduce how quickly their population grows. So when you colonize a new planet, it'll take much longer to populate that planet. So by taking this, it'll give you more points that you can then select other positive traits. And you can really tailor some interesting races in order to create some crazy roleplay type strategies going forward. Personally, this isn't my thing. I don't really care about doing this. I don't really care about role-playing. I do like the random, though. Beyond the 5 or so 8 pre-created races, there's a randomize button where it just goes through and spends the points automatically. And sometimes you get bit in the ass with this, but a lot of times you get these very interesting races with some unique trait choices that you have to analyze your own race and figure out a strategy that will work for them. Like you have to keep your population happy, so you have to look at them and figure out their religion and their political system, if they're going to be a military-driven, whatever, over democracy, or if it's how it's going to be driven, and take this into account with your strategy moving forward. I do like this. It means each time I start off a new race, I have a new set of tasks, of checks and balances I have to weigh out in order to plan my species going forward. There's also different technology type trees, so you can choose different options for your faster than light travel. Some of them are literally just faster than light engines, so you can follow like hyperlanes between planets, or you can use warp gates, similar to like Mass Effect, where you set up a gate, and within that gate it will have enough room to cover maybe a dozen planets or a dozen systems. You can jump from that gate to any of those systems and back, build another warp gate, jump back, and it allows for generally a faster travel, but it means faster travel from that one point. It works well. This is the best part of the game. The initial part where you're first bringing a race up and you're just starting out is really, really good. The game does have a tech tree, kind of. So unlike Civilization, where you're going to have a clear tree and you look at it and you're like, we're here and I want to get there. So I want to research A, B, and C, which will allow me to research D, right? Well, you don't actually have a viewable tree within Stellaris. Instead, what will happen is there are several, like, say, beginning researches that you can do. Several beginning physics type researches. Maybe there's 9 of them. The game seems to randomly pick like 3 of these. And after you research one of those, the game will randomly pick 3 more from that now pool of 8, right? And then you'll get 3 more out of that pool of 7, then 3 more out of that pool of 6. At which point now you'll start seeing maybe a few of the next tier up and still some of the lower ones. So you do get to choose what it is you're going to research, but you don't actually know what your next option is going to be. So very early on, you might see the ability to research something very rare, right? You might get to research something super high early on, but it takes a very long time. Or you might also miss out on a very early specific research that are needed for a special technology just because the RNG doesn't roll in your favor. For example, you need a certain research in order to create destroyers. They're your tier 2 ship. You start off with cruiser, then you go destroyer, or no, it's Corvette, destroyer, cruiser, I think. Anyway, destroyer is the second one. And you need to upgrade your spaceport in order to get these destroyers. Well, you can be very unlucky and just that research never comes up, or at least doesn't come up for a while down the road, which puts you way behind the 8 ball in terms of military power for a long time. Other times it could be your first option that you get, you can pick it up and you can get really way far ahead. There's pros and cons to this system. Obviously, not having direct control over what it is you're going to research can be annoying, can be frustrating when you get behind the 8 ball on that and you don't have the research you need. But it does mean each race kind of develops naturally, organically, as it grows in terms of research. And yeah, it's good and bad altogether. That research can be used then put into building new ships. So there is a ship creator within the game, which is well enough, similar to how I don't really care about creating my own races. I don't really care about creating ships. I let the system automatically do it, and it automatically updates and updates my ships. So basically, the starting cruiser will get updated with newer weapons as I research those weapons automatically. I don't need to go in and redesign the ship every time I research a new technology. But if you are someone that wants to sit down and create a hull and everything, you can create your own ships. Unlike, I think it's Galactic Civilizations, I think Gal Civ 3, where you can actually go in and it's like a wireframe editor and you can combine hulls. You can't do that. What you do is early on when you first create your race, you pick like a design type, be it like angled and sleek or large and cubulin or whatever. And then you can, on hard points, choose your weapons, choose your armors. Whereas in Gal Civ 3, you actually can go out on the wireframe and you can adjust and make the ships look completely different. Not that I've seen, you can't do that in this, but, you know, it's well enough. So all of that's good. Also, the game is large. The solar systems, or whatever, the galaxy, is massive. The ones you're seeing here are just medium-sized and large-sized galaxies, and you're talking the large ones like over 300 stars, or 300 systems, and each system has generally one habitable planet. Some of them will have 2, some of them will very rarely have 3, and some of them will have 0. But generally like one habitable planet per system. So there's a lot of real estate, a lot of space, a lot of empires that can be going on a single map at a time. And that scale is really nice. Being able to zoom all the way out and just see the whole cluster, the whole nebula kind of laid out and everything, it's neat. Watching the empires as you expand and run into these new empires is also really, really good. The last thing I should have actually explained probably much earlier is this is not turn-based. So one of the early examples I brought up was Civilization. Civilization's a very clear turn-based game. This is a hybrid RTS game, similar to, say, like Tropico, where you can adjust how fast the game goes. You can either pause it completely, have it running in slow, normal, fast, or fastest. And then time within that, though, progresses linearly. It's not turn-based. It's just day, go. It just flows linearly. It works. It's something that if you play Paradox games you're used to, you understand quite well. Now, the game fails beyond that. Beyond what I've just mentioned, the game is just very light in terms of complexity. There is, for example, no espionage in the game at all. Not that I've been able to find, and I've put about 10 hours into the game at this point. I've got a fairly late game empire. There's no espionage. When you run into a species, you can view them in there's a list that's the different empires, and if you mouse over it, it'll say like enemy fleet or enemy military capacity, and it'll tell you that they have roughly equal or they have superior technology, they have roughly equal or superior fleet power, and they have roughly equal, superior, overwhelming, whatever technology. And so you can look at this and say, all right, we have roughly equal technology, roughly equal fleet, but they have a larger fleet capacity. I can fight them. But there's no way to like send a ship and look and actually scout and see what their fleet looks like. There's like a rock, paper, scissors element when it comes to ship combat, where like lasers are weak against shields. Shields are weak against, I want to say, ballistics. Ballistics are weak against armor. Armor is weak against shields. You get kind of this rock, paper, scissors. So you can't scout out your enemy and look at their fleet and say, oh, I want to build my ships like this to counter them. No, you have to wait until you've gone to war with them, got into combat with them, and then you can actually finally see their fleet and then adjust from there. Maybe if you've fought multiple wars with them, you can remember from a previous war, but they might change just as you might change as the game goes on. There's just no espionage at all. Also, the amount of political interactions that you can have with other empires is very limited. Essentially, it's going to come down to you either set up an embassy and trade with another empire to make them friendly with you, in which case, if you can make them friendly enough, they might join you in a peace agreement, a non-aggression pact, and maybe if they're a very weak race or a pacifist race, you might be able to make them your what's the word I'm looking for? Where they swear loyalty to you. You become their I don't remember. Whatever. Or you go to war with them. And by go to war with them, I mean all out, full out war. There's no border disputes. There's no like, okay, there's a system between us and them. We want it, they want it. Let's fight it out a little bit. No, it's all out war, all or nothing. And there's just no depth here in terms of political wrangling. And that's real disappointing, especially when you look at Crusader Kings and there's so much there. This game is just lacking a lot of that. It's also lacking a lot of late game content. There'll become a point somewhere around 5 to 6 hours into a game where basically you build up a large fleet to where it's a strain on your economy. You declare war on an enemy, you go in, you bash into them, you fight back and forth, you might be able to get enough points scored to take 1 or 2 planets, and then you make peace. And you've lost 3/4 of your fleet. You're now at peace for like 5 years. You build up your fleet again, and you rinse and repeat. And that's the way most of the end game plays out. You just repeat this over and over and over again. You build so many ships that your economy starts crashing. You go to war. You lose half your ships. You gain a planet. You go to peace. You reinforce that planet. You rebuild your fleet, and you'd go over again. It's just not very interesting. What I find is the first 4 hours of a new map is really enjoyable. The first 4 hours is you're exploring, you're running into new races, and you're trying to evaluate, oh, we got a very militaristic empire over here that's xenophobic militaristic. They're going to be a problem. But I have a pacifist nation over here that wants to be traders. So let's befriend them, trade them, hopefully get a bunch of rare resources to build a fleet to fight these guys. That part's interesting. Now, once you get to the point where you're actually fighting them, it becomes very old, very boring, very still, very quickly. And I've said a lot of varies there. I don't know, guys. Stellaris is good. It's not a bad game. But like many Paradox games, it needs 3, 4, 5 pieces of substantial DLC to flesh these systems out. And in a year's time, I have no doubt that this game's probably going to be great. But as it sits right now, if you're not a die-hard Paradox fan, a die-hard 4X fan, which if you are, you've already bought this game. But if you have not bought it, just wait. Paradox does this a lot. They release games that are not quite feature complete. And it's part of the reason I can't complain too much here is I knew what I was getting into. I knew this game was going to take some DLC to flesh out. So I'm not angry about this by any means. But for the average consumer that's not a big fan, what will happen is if you wait, say about 4 months from now, they're going to release their first thing of big DLC, paid DLC. When they do that, the game will go on sale probably for about half price. So it'll be about $20. At that point, buy the base game. 4 months after that, they will release a second piece of large DLC. then buy the first one, because the first DLC will be on sale about half off. And if you do this, you'll save yourself a good bit of money. And the game is worth playing. It is pretty darn good. It is enjoyable. It's just not complete enough to justify the $40 price tag right now, in my opinion. Alright, if you've played it, I'd love to hear what you think down below. Were my expectations just too high? Was Crusader Kings 2 in space just too much of an expectation? And as such, I'm hard on this game, as I admit that might be possibly true. So I'd love to hear what you think down below. Until next time, this has been Power. Thanks for watching.
Station under attack.